The report came to me on a Tuesday, tucked inside a border warden's weekly dispatch as though it were a minor irregularity. A loose fence post, a disputed grazing line. Unregistered healer operating beyond Greywood Pack territory. Aldenmore borderlands, no pack name on record. 6 recovered wolves in the last season, none bearing a licensed healer's seal. I read it twice. 6 wolves, recovered. In the borderlands, where the nearest licensed pack healer was 40 miles north in Calder's Hold, and where wolves who strayed past the Greywood boundary markers generally did not come back in working condition. My warden captain expected me to send someone. I told him I would go myself. He had the good sense not to argue. I told myself it was efficiency. A borderland visit was long overdue. The Aldenmore stretch had been administered at arm's length for 2 generations, since my grandmother's time, and an unregistered healer operating outside pack law was a legal matter that deserved the Alpha King's attention, not a junior warden's. I had reasons. They were all correct. They were not, as it turned out, the real one, but I did not know that yet. I rode out on the Wednesday, 2 wardens behind me, into the flat gray light of a late autumn morning. The Aldenmore borderlands lay at the southwestern edge of the Greywood territory, where the forest thinned into a scatter of stone-walled cottages and cleared fields, and the air smelled of wood smoke and turned earth rather than the deep resin pine of the holds to the north. The border track was well maintained, which surprised me slightly. The cottages had gardens, and the gardens were not given over to winter entirely. There were still herbs under cloth, and one woman I passed was turning a cold frame with methodical care in the frost, not looking up. The healer's cottage was at the far edge of the village cluster, which was either deliberate or circumstance. I suspected deliberate. It sat back from the track behind a low stone wall, and even from the gate I could see that the kitchen light was on, and that there was smoke from the chimney that smelled of something other than wood, something clean, faintly medicinal. A smell my wolf noted before my mind caught up. He went very still, my wolf, at the gate. I paused with my hand on the latch. My wolf does not go still at things. He is a wary, watchful creature, trained by decades of governance to stay alert, to assess, to hold himself ready. He goes quiet when I command it, but it is an active quiet, coiled, ready to spring. This was different. This was the stillness of something that had arrived somewhere it had been looking for. I opened the gate. The woman at the kitchen table did not look up immediately. She was mid-procedure, a wolf's flank laid across a clean board, a length of gut thread and a curved needle moving with a patience I recognized as competence rather than slowness. The wolf was sedated, not struggling, which meant she had dosed it correctly and at the right time, which meant she had done this before. The kitchen smelled of the medicinal smoke, and of dried herbs, and of warm stone, and of something underneath all of that my wolf turned toward like a compass finding north. "Alpha King," she said without looking up, "I expected a warden." "I sent myself," I said. "Then you've ridden a long way to tell me I need a license." "I've ridden a long way to understand what's happening out here," I said. "Those are different things." She did look up then, brown eyes, steady and assessing with the particular quality of someone who has learned to read situations quickly and without fuss. She was perhaps 30, not beautiful in the way of women who know they are beautiful, something different, something that had settled into itself. "The wolf will be another 20 minutes, she said. "If you want to wait, there's a chair by the window. If you want to talk while I work, I can manage that too. What I can't do is stop before the suture is finished." I sat down by the window. I watched her finish the suture. She worked with the kind of economy that is only possible when you have done something many times over, when your hands know the work before your mind directs them. She talked while she worked, not nervously, answering my questions with the same attention she gave the suture, neither more nor less. Her name was Marin. She had no pack affiliation because her mother had left her pack before Marin was born, and the borderlands were not within any pack's formal territory, and she had never thought it necessary to apply for pack standing since the pack whose territory lay nearest had never shown any interest in the borderlands until now. The wolves came to her because they had learned that coming to her was safe. She had not sought them. She had not advertised. She had simply not turned any of them away. "How long?" I asked. "The first one was 4 years ago," she said. "He had a leg caught in a fence, nothing dramatic." She tied off the last knot and set the needle down. "He told the others, I suppose. They tell each other things." "They do," I said. She covered the wolf in a clean cloth and settled him carefully on the board, then washed her hands with the efficiency of someone who has done that particular motion so many times it has become its own small ceremony. When she turned back, she looked at me with the same assessing steadiness. "Am I being expelled?" she said. "No. Am I being licensed retroactively?" "That's one option. What are the others?" "I'm still determining that," I said, which was true, and which was also, I realized, the first time in several years I had said something true about my own uncertainty to anyone who was not my warden captain. She nodded as though that were a reasonable answer and put the kettle on. I stayed for 3 hours. I had intended to stay for 1. My wardens waited outside in the cold with the good professional patience of men who have learned not to question my timeline when I am mid-assessment. Marin fed the wolf broth when he began to surface from the sedation, by hand, from a small clay bowl, not speaking to him, but making a low, continuous sound that was not quite humming. The wolf ate from her hand without hesitation, which was more than most of my licensed healers could claim with a wolf they had not worked with before. My wolf inside me made a sound I had not heard from him in 20 years. It was not a growl and it was not a howl. It was something quieter and more fundamental, the sound of recognition. I filed it away. I was not, I told myself, the kind of man who acted on sounds his wolf made without further evidence. I rode back to the Borderland Inn and told my wardens we would be staying 2 nights. They rearranged their expressions into neutrality and did not ask why. The second day, I had no procedural justification for returning. I returned anyway. Marin was in the kitchen garden when I arrived, cutting back the last of the rosemary under the frost cloth, and she straightened when she heard the gate and looked at me with an expression I read accurately as, "You again." Not unfriendly, simply noting the fact. "No new wolves," she said. "I know," I said. "I came to look at your records." This was not untrue. She had records, a careful, handwritten ledger that turned out to be meticulous. Dates, presenting conditions, treatments, recovery notes, and the pack markings on each wolf. Noted in a column she labeled origin, if determinable, with the mild pragmatism of someone who knew the wolves came from multiple territories and chose not to make it a political issue. 3 of the 6 were from my own pack's outer ranges. 2 were from Calder's hold. 1 had no markings she could read, which she noted without judgment. I read the ledger at her kitchen table while she worked at the other end of it, grinding dried root for something she said was for fever management in winter. The sound was rhythmic and steady. The kitchen was warm. My wolf settled into the stillness he had found the previous day and did not stir from it. It was just before dusk when the bond mark appeared on my wrist. I had not felt one building. That was the thing that arrested me. There had been no warning heat, no gradual brightening of the skin, none of the signs I had been told about since boyhood. It was simply there when I looked, a small tracing across the inside of my left wrist, the pale mark that every Alpha King carries from birth in latent form, the mark that was said to wake only in the presence of his fated mate, and which had been dormant on my wrist for 43 years without so much as a flicker. It was warm, not hot warm, the way a stone holds the day's heat into evening. I looked at it for a long moment. Then I looked across the kitchen table at Marin, who was watching me with an expression that had shifted from its usual steadiness into something more careful. "Your wrist," she said. "Yes. I've read about that," she said. "The Alpha's mark, what it means when it wakes." "Then you know what it means." She set the grinding stone down, folded her hands on the table. I had noticed over 2 days that she folded her hands when she was thinking through something important, not nervously, not defensively, but the way a person organizes themselves before saying something they intend to mean. "I'm not pack," she said. "I have no rank, no standing, no wolf form. The Borderland families here know me as a healer and nothing else. I am not what you would have chosen." "No," I said. "You are what I was given. Those are different things, and I have come to believe the second is better than the first." She looked at me steadily. "You rode out here to cite me for operating without a license." "I rode out here," I said, "because the report mentioned 6 wolves, and because my warden captain expected me to send a junior officer, and I sent myself instead, and I didn't know why until about yesterday evening when my wolf went still at your gate." The kitchen was very quiet. "That's an unusual courtship speech," she said at last. "It's an accurate one," I said. I can refine it if you prefer. The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something preparatory to one. What does it mean, she asked carefully, for someone with no pack standing? What happens to the borderlands, to the people here? I won't leave them without a healer. I had been thinking about this since the mark had appeared, which had been perhaps 12 minutes ago, and which was not very long, but which had been sufficient. You don't leave, I said. The borderlands come under direct Greywood administration, which they should have done 2 generations ago. You hold formal healers standing under the Alpha King's household, which is a category that exists and has simply never been used for someone who lives 40 miles from the main hold. The wolves continue to come to your door. Nothing about your work changes. And the other part, she said. The other part, I said, is that you would be my fated mate. Which means what you decide it means to you and what I give you time to understand. I am not asking you to decide tonight. I'm asking you to know what the mark means and to give it the weight it deserves. She looked at the mark on my wrist, then she looked at me. All right, she said. It was not a yes and it was not a no. It was the steadiness she gave to everything, the acknowledgement of a fact, the willingness to sit with it and think. I found I respected it more than I would have respected an immediate answer in either direction. We ate dinner at her kitchen table. She had made soup, root vegetables, and dried mushroom, and something I didn't recognize that turned out to be a borderland grain she got from the farms to the south. My wardens ate in the village inn and did not inquire. The wolf in the back room was awake by now and making small sounds of returning consciousness, and Marin got up twice to check on him, and came back both times with the settled expression of someone whose patient is doing well. I told her about the holds, about what being Alpha King involved at a practical level day to day, which was not what most people imagined. More ledger work, more boundary disputes, more letters requiring diplomatic precision than any of the stories suggested. She listened without performing interest, which meant her interest was real. She told me about the borderlands, about the families who had been here for 4 and 5 generations, who had no pack standing either, who had built something functional and quiet in the margins of the pack territories, and who needed more than formal incorporation, simply to be left alone to continue it. I listened and understood, and felt the familiar movement of a problem orienting itself toward a solution, not difficult, just requiring attention. It was late when I stood to leave. She walked me to the gate, as she had not done the previous evening, which I noted. The mark, she said at the gate. Does it mean something to you, personally, not as a matter of pack law? I considered the question as carefully as it deserved. I have governed this territory for 19 years, I said. I am careful and thorough, and I do not act without sufficient evidence. I have been that way since I was a young man because the alternative is chaos, and the people I govern pay the price for it. I have applied that same standard to every part of my life. I paused. My wolf went still at your gate on the first evening. I have never in my life had to tell my wolf to be still because he had found the thing he was looking for. I don't have more evidence than that yet. But I have learned to trust that particular kind of evidence when it arrives. She held my gaze. Something in her face shifted, not toward vulnerability, not toward softness exactly, but toward a kind of openness that was different from her usual careful composure. I'll think about it, she said. I know, I said. That's why I'm not asking you to do anything else tonight. I walked back up the track toward the inn. Behind me I heard the gate close, and the cottage door, and then the quiet of the borderlands settling back over everything. The cold air, the distant sound of the Greywood's outer trees in the wind, the particular silence of a place that has been outside the notice of power for a long time, and has made something workable of that silence. My wolf inside me was still, not coiled, not ready to spring, simply resting for the first time in years in a stillness that did not cost him anything. The third morning I was dressed and ready before the wardens were, and was considering, for the first time in recent memory, what I was actually going to say to a woman I had known for 48 hours about the matter of a fated bond, when I heard the horses. 3 horses, fast and coming from the north. I met them at the inn's door. 3 borderland wardens, not my men, but Calder's hold wardens, in Calder's colors, carrying the hold's administrative seal on their dispatch bag. They were not expecting to find the Alpha King in the Aldenmore borderlands at 7 in the morning. Their faces arranged themselves quickly into the careful blankness of men recalibrating. Alpha King, said the lead warden, We didn't know you were here. Clearly, I said. What's the dispatch? He handed it over without argument. I read it in the gray morning light. It was an expulsion order, formally executed, carrying Calder's Hold's stamp of Borderland Administrative Authority, requiring one unregistered healer operating in the Aldenmore borderlands to vacate the territory within 7 days, under the Borderlands Standing Ordinance against unlicensed practitioners operating within 40 miles of a registered pack hold. It was, technically, within Calder's legal rights to issue. The Aldenmore borderlands had never been formally assigned to Greywood administration, which was the neglect I had been thinking about fixing since yesterday. Come with me, I said. The wardens exchanged a glance and followed. Marin was in the kitchen garden again. She heard the gate and straightened, and when she saw 3 unfamiliar wardens behind me, her face did what her face rarely did, which was arrange itself into an expression of careful bracing. She had read the situation before any of us spoke. The expulsion order, she said. It was not a question. Yes, I said. These are Calder's Hold wardens. They had the legal standing to issue it under the Borderlands Ordinance because the Aldenmore territory has never been formally assigned. Had, said one of the wardens, picking up the tense with the reflexes of a man who pays close attention to how kings choose their words. Had, I confirmed. I turned to face them fully. The Aldenmore borderlands are formally assigned to direct Greywood Crown administration, effective today. I will be filing the paperwork with the Pack Council upon my return, backdated to this morning, which is within my authority as Alpha King. This healer operates under the formal standing of the Greywood Crown household, which supersedes Calder's jurisdictional ordinance. The lead warden was young and conscientious and doing his best. Alpha King, the Hold issued the order in good faith. I know, I said. Calder's Hold acted correctly on the information available. I'm informing you that the information has changed. I paused. This woman is my fated mate. I am naming her as such before witnesses. That is also relevant information. The silence that followed had a particular quality. The 3 wardens looked at my wrist, where the mark was visible in the morning light, no longer the pale tracery of the previous evening, but warmer, more defined, the way a thing that has been recognized settles into being more fully itself. Then they looked at Marin. From the direction of the village, I was aware that several of the borderland families had come out onto their thresholds. Word travels fast in small places. They had heard the horses, and some of them, I thought, had known about the expulsion order before I did. Marin looked at the wardens, then she looked at me. And then she did something that I had not expected, which was that she unfolded her hands. They had been folded. I had not noticed when she'd done that, and let them rest at her sides and said without raising her voice, yes. Not to the wardens, to me. Not a ceremony, not a vow. One word in the cold morning air with the same quietness she gave to everything and with the same weight. Yes, I said back. The wardens received new instructions, rearranged their understanding, and departed within the hour with a formal letter in their dispatch bag, and the correction filed on their administrative record. My own wardens assisted with the paperwork with the careful professionalism of men who had spent 3 days waiting in a borderland inn and were very relieved to understand why. The borderland families, in the way of close-knit small communities everywhere, had produced food by mid-morning. There was bread and preserved fruit, and a hard local cheese that was, I found, better than anything served at formal table in Calder's Hold, though I did not say so to the Calder wardens. The family from the closest cottage brought it to Marin's door, and a boy of about 8 set it on the step and ran away immediately, which made Marin almost smile, which was the most I had seen from her in that direction. The recovered wolf was well enough to walk slowly in the afternoon. Marin brought him to the door and watched him go, with the particular expression of a healer watching a patient leave, not sad, not celebratory, simply tracking, confirming that the work was done. The wolf paused at the gate and looked back at her, and she nodded once very slightly, as though acknowledging something between them. 4 years, I said, watching him go. 4 years, she said. And you never asked anything from any of them. No pack standing, no license, no formal recognition. I didn't need it, she said. They needed the work done, so I did the work. I thought about this for a moment. That is going to be an unusual quality in an Alpha King's fated mate, I said. Most of the people who hold standing at the main hold have very fixed ideas about the value of standing. Will that be a problem? For them, I said, possibly. For us, no. She looked at me with the assessing steadiness I had come to recognize as her primary mode of engagement with the world. You're very certain, she said, for a man who told me 2 days ago he needed more evidence. I have more evidence now, I said. You said yes in front of 3 wardens and a borderland village and did not make a ceremony of it. That is the most useful piece of evidence I have gathered. The corner of her mouth moved again, and this time it completed itself. A real, small, careful smile, the kind that has been decided upon rather than arrived at accidentally. The paperwork, she said, the Pack Council filing. I'll do it on Monday. What does it require? Not much, I said. The bond mark is its own documentation. There will be a formal presentation at the Greywood Main Hold, which is a requirement of the Council Charter and not something I have discretion over. But that is a matter of some weeks from now, and I am less concerned with the formal presentation than I am with. I paused, choosing words, with making sure you understand what you said yes to before you are presented with the institutional version of it. She considered this. What did I say yes to? A long partnership, I said, with a man who is careful and thorough and not particularly quick about anything, and who governs a territory that requires constant attention, and who has been accustomed to working alone for 19 years. Who is going to have to learn how to include someone, who thinks that the learning is worth it, and who has not thought that about anything in a considerable time. Marin was quiet for a moment. I've been working alone for longer than that, she said. In a place no one was paying attention to. I think I know something about the value of including someone. Yes, I said, I think you do. We sat on the low stone wall of the kitchen garden as the afternoon went gray and cold, and she told me more about the borderland families, who they were, what they had built, what they needed from the pack system, and what they specifically did not need. I listened and took note of all of it because it was useful, and because I had come to understand in 48 hours that Marin's information was consistently more useful than most of what reached me through official channels. The wolf from the morning came back at dusk. He sat at the gate and waited, and when Marin opened it, he walked in and settled near the kitchen door in a way that made it clear he considered this arrangement permanent. He does that, she said, looking at him. Does what? Decides things, she said. All of them do. They decide and then they stay decided. A quality I admire in wolves, I said. She looked at me, and the assessing steadiness in her eyes had something else in it now, not warmth exactly, not yet, but the beginnings of a warmth, the way a hearthstone begins to hold heat. Slow and sure. We ate again at the kitchen table. My wardens had found adequate accommodation in the village and had stopped hovering. The wolf slept near the door. The lamp on the table was the low, amber gold of oil light, and outside the windows the borderland dark was settling in, the kind of dark that is not empty but simply quiet, the quiet of a place that has learned to exist without much notice and has made itself sufficient in that existence. Marin asked me about the Pack Council, about the treaty structure between the northern holds and the borderland territories, about the specific machinery of how Greywood territory operated and who I relied on and what the genuine difficulties were, the problems that didn't resolve neatly, the things that kept me working at midnight more often than I intended. I answered honestly, which I found easier than I had expected. She had the quality, which I had not encountered often, of making honesty feel like the obvious choice, rather than the carefully maintained discipline it normally was. At some point in the evening she moved her chair. Not dramatically, a small adjustment, half an inch toward the table's center, which happened to be toward me. She did not appear to notice she had done it, but I noticed. It was the thing I thought about, riding back to the inn in the cold dark, not the formal naming before the wardens, not the Pack Council paperwork, not the administrative matters that would need to be managed and which I was already, out of habit, organizing in sequence. Those were real. They mattered. But the half-inch was the thing I held. In the following weeks, I came back to the Aldenmore borderlands 4 times before the formal presentation at Greywood Main Hold was scheduled. There was always a reason: the administrative filing, the territory assignment, a boundary question that required my attention, a meeting with the borderland families about the formal structure of their incorporation. The reasons were all genuine. They were, again, not quite the whole truth. Marin did not pretend not to notice. She was not a woman who pretended. Each time I arrived, she had the gate open and the lamp lit, which was more than she said about it, and more than enough. The wolf who had decided to stay was named, by the borderland boy who had brought the cheese, as Marker. Marin accepted this without apparent objection. Marker accepted the boy's visits with the resigned dignity of a wolf, who has made his choices and sees no reason to complicate them. My warden captain, when I returned from the second visit, gave me a look of such profound professional restraint that I promoted him. The formal presentation at the Greywood main hold was, as required, attended by the full pack council and the pack hierarchy, and a considerable number of people who had opinions about the appropriateness of the Alpha King's fated mate being an unranked borderland healer with no wolf form and no pack name. I had anticipated this and had prepared accordingly. The bond mark was documentation that admitted no dispute. Marin stood before the council in the dress she had brought, plain, well-made, nothing performed, and answered their questions with the same steadiness she gave to everything. She did not appear to require my protection from the council's scrutiny. She appeared to find it mildly interesting. Afterwards, a senior council member told me privately that the Aldenmore healer was an unusual woman. I said yes, she was, and thanked him for his observation. The council member who had been most doubtful, an older woman from the northern holds who had served 3 Alpha Kings and had fixed views about proper lineage, came to me 3 weeks after the presentation and said that she had reviewed the Borderland Ledger, the healer's records of every wolf she had treated, and had noted that 2 of the wolves in Marin's 4th year were from the Alpha King's own outer pack ranges, wolves that had been listed as missing in our own records and never accounted for. They had come back from the Aldenmore borderlands healthy and well, with no record of who had tended them, until now. She paused, and then she said, "She's been tending your pack for 4 years without knowing it." I said, "I know." She looked at the mark on my wrist for a moment. Then she said, "The mark woke at the right time then." I said, "I think it woke at the first time she was close enough for it to recognize her." She nodded with the expression of a woman who has lived long enough to know that the things that matter most are usually the things that arrive quietly, without announcing themselves, and take up permanent residence before you fully understand what has happened. I did not disagree. The Aldenmore borderlands were incorporated into Greywood administration by midwinter, with provisions that protected the autonomy of the borderland families, which Marin had negotiated with a precision that surprised several of my senior administrators and did not surprise me at all. The licensed healers standing under the Crown household was formalized. Marker wintered at the Borderland cottage and was joined in February by 2 more wolves who apparently also had opinions about permanent arrangements. I spent more time in the Aldenmore borderlands than any Alpha King had spent there in 2 generations. My warden captain handled the holds admirably in my absence and did not say anything about it except to occasionally mention, with the mildness of a man who has excellent professional judgment, that the Southern Dispatch reports were coming in unusually well since the borderland administrative restructuring. What I understood by winter's end was something that I had not had language for in the first days, when my wolf went still at the gate and the mark woke on my wrist and I told myself I needed more evidence. The evidence was this, that a woman can tend something faithfully for 4 years without knowing what she is tending, because faithfulness is not a choice that requires an object. It is a quality of character, a way of being in the world, and it will find its object when the world provides one. Marin had been faithful, to the wounded wolves who came to her door, to the borderland families who needed a healer, to the work itself, which asked everything of her hands and nothing of her rank. She had not known she was waiting. She had not been waiting. She had simply been entirely and without reservation herself. And I had ridden into the Aldenmore borderlands on a Tuesday morning to sort out an administrative irregularity, and had found, at a kitchen table with a recovering wolf and a ledger, and a steadiness I recognized before I could name it, the answer to the question I had stopped asking. On the last night of winter, Marin and I sat at the kitchen table with the lamp between us and the Greywood administration's annual accounts open on my side and her planting ledger open on hers, and the wolf Marker asleep against the kitchen door, and the sound of the wind coming off the Greywood's outer trees in the dark, which was a sound I had come to know the same way I knew the sound of the holds, not as a foreign thing, but as a thing that had become familiar through long and willing attendance. She reached across the table, without looking up from her ledger, and set her hand over mine. She did not say anything, neither did I. My wolf was still and warm and certain. The mark on my wrist was warm. Outside, the winter was giving way to something else, not dramatically, not all at once, but in the way that things give way when they have run their full course and the next thing is simply ready. The borderland dark had the quality of late winter dark, not the deep cold of midwinter, but a dark that knows it is temporary, that is already carrying in it the memory of what comes next. I turned my hand over under hers and held it, and kept my eyes on the accounts. It had always been going to be this. I understood that now. Not in the sense of fate that removes choice, but in the sense of a thing so exactly right that it seems, looking back, that the shape of it was always there. In the reports filed and ignored, in the wolves who came back recovered and wouldn't say where they had been, in a mark that had waited 43 years without asking anything of me, patient as a hearthstone holding the day's heat. She had said yes before the wardens and the borderland village. She said it again now, in no words at all, with the pressure of her hand over mine. And that was sufficient. That was, in fact, everything.